Visual effects is post-production enhancement to existing footage. There's loads of different facets of visual effects, everything from compositing to 3D animation, 3D modeling, motion graphics. They're all really cool and they're all super important because these days, visual effects is really just limited by the possibilities of our imagination. There's nothing it can't do, which is kind of cool and kind of scary. But it's super important that we understand the techniques and the processes involved in visual effects so that we can fully utilize and harness its power and potential inside of our own films. So today I've got 4 exercises to undertake. I'm going to do a sky replacement, I'm going to do some 3D modeling, I'm going to create an animated title design, and I'm also going to recreate a shot from a movie. And all these exercises I've created based off some tutorials and some resources that I found online, and what I've done is linked all of those in the description below so you guys can check them out, you guys can watch along, follow the exercises, and you can learn visual effects yourself along with me. So let's jump in and let's get right to our first exercise. Okay, so the first thing that I have to do today is a sky replacement. And this was based off of Video Copilot's basic sky replacement tutorial. That's linked below so you can check it out, and I'll probably leave a card up here as well for you so you can just click straight and go to it. But the first thing I did was I went to the local park and I got a cool shot to practice with, and I also found a nice image of a moody sky that I thought I might want to try and composite in and replace the boring bland sky that we have in the actual footage. So I brought both those elements into After Effects, and the first thing I did was I applied a linear wipe transition to the image. I changed the transition completeness to about 40%, and this way I can see roughly how my final composite will look. The next thing to do is to track the background of the footage. So I went and I got the tracker and I tracked the motion of the background, and the reason I want to track the background is because I want the sky to be a part of the background, and I want it to have the same parallax as the background in relation to the foreground. And so what I want to do is track something in the background. I chose a nice little window on the house. And so I went ahead and I let that track, and then I copied the X and Y data to the image. I repositioned and scaled the image so that it fills the entire frame for the entire duration of the shot. And now that I copied the track data over, if we play it forward, we can see that our sky is actually tracked into our footage, which is super cool. But there are still a couple of problems. The next thing to do is to duplicate the footage, lay it on top of the sky, and then what I did was I added a color key to that top piece of footage, and I keyed out the sky. And this helps us to reveal the composited sky underneath, and this only works in this specific scenario because our sky is pretty bland and the same color, and that color isn't really present anywhere else in the frame. That's the only reason that this pretty cheap and quick and easy method of color keying works. It won't always work, and there are certainly scenarios where you'll have to do some more advanced techniques to replace the sky. But in our case, it works great. And this allows us to cut out the trees and the tops of the houses and overlay them back on top of the sky again so that all the elements are in the right place. The last thing to do is to color correct our sky image, and it's super important to color correct all of your visual effects things to your plate footage. And the reason we do this is because if we want to sell the idea that this was the sky that was actually there, we need to make it look like it was shot with the camera. We need to copy the exposure, the color values, all the things that the camera would have used to shoot the image, we want to try and replicate. So I added a curves effect onto my image, and I changed the exposure values and some of the color values, and now it looks pretty good, pretty much like it was there in the first place. I went ahead and added an adjustment layer overall, and then I used that to color correct the entire footage to give it a little bit more of a Rec 709 look rather than a log look. And here is the final sky replacement. "3D modeling is a huge part of visual effects. It's often used to model characters, vehicles, and environments, all of which can be composited into our live-action footage and make our cool fantasy dream worlds a reality in the film. So what I've been doing is watching a online series by a guy called Blender Guru on YouTube, where he models and UV unwraps and textures a chair. And Blender's a free open source 3D modeling software that I've been using for a while, and I've been watching this series to try and learn a little bit more about 3D modeling, and what I thought I'd do today is take some of the concepts that I learned in that series and try and model my own object with them. So I thought it'd be cool to model Batman's Batarang from Justice League. I thought that would be a simple enough object for me to try and model as someone who's not too experienced with modeling objects, and it could also be a cool asset to use in the future if I want to do any scenes throwing Batarangs or something. It'd be cool to have an asset like that lying around. So my initial attempt with this didn't go very well. I started with a plane and I adjusted it to fit the reference photo, and then I used a solidify modifier and a bevel modifier, but I found that it just wasn't giving me the hard edges that I was looking for, and the bevel modifier didn't really work as expected. Not quite sure what happened there, but it wasn't great. So I scrapped that idea and I started again. This time I started with a cube, and I adjusted it all to the reference photo and did all the loop cuts and aligned all my vertices to the reference. I used a mirror modifier, so I only had to model half of it, and because Batarang is perfectly symmetrical, the mirror modifier just copies the half that I did model and then flips it and puts it on the other side, which makes it super efficient. And the next thing I did was I added a subdivide surface modifier. The next thing I did was I took the top vertices and I essentially manually beveled them. I basically just dragged them all into the center of the mesh a little bit more so that the edges became a little bit beveled naturally. And then I added a subdivision surface modifier to sort of smooth it off nicely. And to create those harder edges, I changed the crease value of those edges. And this way, I can get the nice hard edge that I'm looking for without needing to add any more geometry to the mesh, because we don't want to add geometry unless we really have to. That is my understanding of good topology. So after that, I went ahead and I UV unwrapped the model, and then I grabbed a metal texture online and I did all of the appropriate shading using the bump maps, the normal maps, and the reflections, all the things that good shading requires. And here's a look at my final Batarang model. I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. It's okay for a second attempt at modeling a Batarang. I still have a long way to go with 3D modeling, and it's a huge field to try and understand. But I'm pretty happy with how I was able to apply some of the techniques that I learned in Blender Guru's videos into this model, into this project, and hopefully in the future I can continue to build on those. So not too bad for a second attempt. Okay, so the next exercise that I set for myself was to create a motion graphics title using techniques from all three examples inside of Sonduck Films video basic title design. The first thing I did was I created a storyboard so I could get a really solid idea of the type of title I wanted to create. I find that really helps me with these motion graphics things. And the first thing I did was I added my title words. And I found that a large part of title design is actually the graphic design of the typography. So I made sure that I chose some good fonts that paired well together. The first thing I did after that was creating a shape layer and using the pen tool to draw a rectangular outline around my text. I then created another shape layer and used the rectangle draw tool to create a cool box behind the text, and I then moved it down in the layer stack below the text so that the text appears on top of it. I used a trim paths effect on the outline layer, and I changed the start and the end value so that it animates over time from nothing to complete, and it creates that nice little ring around the title, which looks super cool. And then I went to that rectangle box layer and I animated the x-axis size and position so that it begins at nothing and ends where I want it to be. And in this way it sort of comes on very nicely from the right. It's a cool little animation. And after that, I created yet another shape layer, and I created a box around the title, and I put it above the title layer so it can act as a track map. So I set it to be the alpha map of the text layer, and this way the text layer is only visible when it's inside of that rectangle that I drew. So then all I had to do was animate the text layer to come in from the right and be in the middle of the box when it ends, and that way it sort of appears on the screen through that shape layer, which acts as the mat. It reveals itself as it comes on, which is super cool. The last thing I did was I pre-composed that entire thing, and I added a CC slant effect to it to give it a nicer angle, and then also a blue solid background layer behind it. And here's a look at my final title. Another thing that I think is great to do when we're learning visual effects is to try and emulate shots from films. So I thought I'd start pretty easy with a simple eye color change effect inspired by a scene from Aquaman. And if I take a look at the reference footage here, I can see a couple of things. I can see that the brightness of the eye is changing, and so is the color, and the pupils are also dilating. So the first thing that I did was I went ahead and I shot a plate shot that I could use for a bit of practice. I put that into After Effects, and the first thing that I tried was using a change to color effect. I tried to select the color of my iris and then animate it to change color over time. However, I found that this effect just didn't do a good enough job of targeting the color in my iris, and so I had to scrap that, and I also tried a hue saturation effect with the same results, and I resolved to try to just do it manually. So the first thing that I did was I duplicated the footage layer twice. I then tracked the original footage and I assigned a null to that track data. And then inside of each of the duplicate layers, I created a mask around my eye using one of the duplicates for the left eye and one for the right eye. So I then went through and I feathered the edges of those eye masks so that it integrates a bit better into the original shot. And I parented both of those duplicate layers to the null so that they track nicely with the original footage. I then went back and did some manual clear up of the keyframes. It wasn't quite perfect, so I had to do some manual keyframing. I also had to use some subtraction masks inside of each of the duplicates to make sure that the eye mask was only affecting my iris and not my eyelids or the pupils of my eyes. And then for each of those eye layers, I added a Video Copilot vibrance effect. I changed the color and the gamma and the brightness. And what I did was I actually animated those eye layers' opacity to come on over time so it comes on at the desired time when I look up in the footage. The last thing that I did was I created some smaller masks inside of my eyes just around the pupils, and I animated the mask expansion to come on over time, and it makes it look like the pupil is dilating that way. So here's a look at my final shot. I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. But that's all I got for you guys today. I've left links in the description below to all of the resources and videos that I've based the exercises we did today off of, as well as a list of all the exercises that we did, so I'd recommend going and checking all of those out in the description below. But let me know, what did you guys think of the projects today? Did you learn anything? Were there ways I could have done things better? Let me know if you want to see more of these videos in the future. I'd love to do some more of these videos and show you guys my process of learning visual effects. So let me know in the comments below if that's something you want to see. And whilst you're down there, hit that like button, subscribe, make sure you hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on future visual effects videos. And I look forward to seeing you guys then. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.